Hello, and welcome to The Confident Commit, the podcast for anyone who wants to join the conversation on how to deliver software faster and better.
If you're looking to build a trusted ship, tune in, let's confidently commit.
We're going to talk about observability, and probably a lot of other fascinating things, knowing Charity. I'm your host, Rob Zuber, CTO of CircleCI, the industry leader for all things CI and CD. Charity, thanks so much for joining me here today.
Thanks so much for having me.
So awesome to have you. We've obviously traveled in similar circles for over 20 years, I think now. For anyone who wouldn't know this, we both worked at
Jesus Christ.
Critical Path.
Oh my God, you're at Critical Path?
Yeah, at different times.
Oh my God,
I joined
crazy.
just after you left. So
I was 17 then.
I wish I could say I was 17 then, but I won't let anyone do the math on where I'm at. But a lot of experience, a lot of change in the industry, and then at some point, I don't even know when this was exactly, but I was building some mobile apps, I guess in 2013, and we were building them on top of Parse. Oh. So I did my best to design good schemas, and I apologize for whatever it was that we did. And then sort of saw, as you left there and went on to do Honeycomb after the Facebook acquisition. Well, I mean, now CircleCI is a Honeycomb customer. We love the product. I actually
we're a Circle customer.
It is a little bit like that in this industry, but hopefully that's because we're all doing good things that we're excited about. And so I'm excited to get into all of that. But one of the things that really made me want to have a chat with you is I noticed that a lot of the time when you're speaking publicly, like you talk about observability for sure and reliability, but one of the things that keeps coming up is CI and CD. And some, let's just say, some fairly strong opinions about how that
a little bit.
I mean, that's probably true of a lot of what you talk about, but that's cool. Like I want to hear the strong opinions, and I'm sort of curious, like if you well, let's just start right in the middle there, and then we can work back to some of those other pieces. But sitting where you're sitting, looking at production systems where, as we said, you have a lot of experience, and we'll kind of dive into that. What is it that motivates you to be so interested and so focused on the delivery process?
Well, a kind of shitty engineer, shitty programmer. Well, the honest answer is, I was diagnosed last year with ADHD, which apparently explains a lot of it. I struggle with sitting there and planning what I'm going to be doing tomorrow, next week. And it's just it's like a highway open, just stretching out as far as you can see it. It's very tedious I can't motivate myself. But fires or who knows what's going to happen, or every day is a different problem. I feed on that adrenaline. I'm never calmer than I am when the site is down, nobody get it up, and if I don't figure it out, the company is fucked. I love that. And it's as an industry, we're always trying to build ourselves out of that sort of a job, which is good because there's always more fires to fight. Mm-hmm. But the unpredictability, the chaos, the just systems, right? I find systems more interesting than software, I guess.
Got it. And so that led you, I guess, into more of the operational side. And one thing I mentioned being a Parse customer, and I think I remember you talking about Parse when you were working on that, and the fact that you were trying to manage a large scale database, but had no control over what people were choosing to do with
any of the schemas or queries or anything that people were going to dump in. Yeah, and not just a database, but we about the time we got acquired by Facebook, we had 60,000 mobile apps on Parse, and there were over a million by the time I left. So that's a million little agents of chaos, and I'd wake up every morning and a different one would have hit the iTunes top 10. It's just well, what are we going to do about this? Because often, the ones that were causing the problems were not ones that were causing the most traffic, or that were having the most users, or that were, the most by volume or anything. So all of those top 10 lists that got generated by, your New Relics and your APMs, basically, right? They were just noise. Everything would get slower at once because it was all, there's this choke point of the API servers. We didn't use threading. We had Ruby on Rails. So it's a fixed number of workers. So everything would get slow whenever anything got slow. And trying to find out prime mover there was insanely difficult. It was basically impossible.
And so did that experience, that sort of, the problem isn't necessarily coming from the largest volume. Did that really shape how you ended up thinking about observability?
I consider myself a good engineer, and it was really damaging to my self-respect, just the way parts kept going down and down and down. And every time, and it's just like, what is happening? We were doing a lot of things for their time. We were doing microservices before microservices were really understood and people really understood the failure conditions of them. We were doing a lot of these things that were just kind of cutting edge. And we had this problem of, whenever you're a platform, it's your job to be running your platform, but then to be running their apps too. And like you said, you have no control over what they bring to the table. You just have to take it and deal with it naively, because as a platform, anytime you have to think about a single customer, you've probably failed in some way, right? But we just ended up firefighting, doing database DBA stuff for app after app after app, and it got exhausting. And I tried every tool out there, but anything that uses metrics is it's so focused around, you decide up front what metrics you want to collect and then use them for you. Well, I don't know what metrics I'm going to need. It's a different one every time, right? And you can only pre-generate so many, and you can't slice and dice on the ones that you have. And it's just a bad fit. And with logs, it's well, if I know what to look for, it's the same thing. If I know what to look for, I can find it. But I don't, I'm just I'm lost, right? And we started getting some data sets into Scuba after a year or two at Facebook, and just the amount of time, it used to be kind of, how long will it take us to fix this? I don't know. It's different every time. Days, hours, it dropped like a rock to seconds, not even minutes, but every time with no knowledge of what the problem is going to be, we could just follow the trail of breadcrumbs to the answer every time. We didn't have to guess or jump to the end. And that blew my mind. We recovered so many developer hours and ops hours once we just were able to stop firefighting and find the solutions. And that really, really made an impact on me. I was like, I can't go back to not having this. I would be so much less powerful as an engineer. It's just unthinkable.
One of the other things that I've been thinking about a lot lately is, just the evolution of CircleCI over the time that we've existed has been driven a lot by changes in just software development, right? I mean, there was no Docker when CircleCI was started. So the idea that I'm just going to break this down into a bunch of, services and manage it, that was for a certain class of company. Now it's democratized, or whatever word you want to use, which kind of means, here, we gave you all this complexity that you don't understand. Please enjoy using it. And so do you think that that's driven when I think about what's most interesting to me inside of Honeycomb, it's the ability to see, traces and spans and how things are flowing through the system, which is a complex problem. Has that been a driver of
no doubt
need and adoption?
I mean, it absolutely, I think, was driven by the two things: by the role of microservices, like you said, the wide scale adoption of microservices, and the inexpensiveness of hardware. You think back, why did we have metrics? Because it's the smallest amount of space you could possibly use to get something interesting about your software, right? It's just a number with a couple of tags, right? You discarded everything else about what's happening. You just kept the number.
The way that you've solved the problem is very cool, but you solved it and now everybody can use it, as opposed to everybody saying, okay, now we need a team of engineers to go sort out how we're going to deal with all this data and age it out because we can't afford it to keep it in a database. Well, I love that story also because I think it's very reflective of your personal, I'll say, obsession with databases, having been on the wrong end of some poorly designed databases, right? So taking that and really thinking through, how do I do this in a reliable way, right? Data stores for so many folks remain this single point of failure or complexity that we're doing schedules times.
I've spent my entire career telling people, never write a database. Never write a database. We were lucky. We were lucky to exist. We could very well have gone under a couple of times. We found some other investors who were a little bit more patient, but we very nearly got wiped out of existence because there's such a steep curve to doing anything novel in infrastructure, because it takes so long to do something different. I think Go ahead.
There's such an interesting point in there about business building, which is certainly, I didn't think we were going to talk about business building, but let's do it. Like, what's really important is understanding what your unique differentiation is, right? So that particular space, the space that you're in, if you conclude, acknowledge, however you want to think about it, the thing that's going to allow us, as you said, to be uniquely differentiated in this space is if we actually make the investment in data storage, because that's the hard problem here, then that is actually creating a huge amount of value. It takes a little bit of a leap of faith, right?
Longer.
And like, if you look at I don't want to go too far down this path, but the history of tech companies in the Valley or whatever, the amount of hard tech that we're building now is, as a percentage, way lower than we used to, right? And so, there's like people are building self-driving cars and stuff. Like, there's interesting problems, but a lot of it is I'm stringing together a few pieces of interesting technology that someone else has built in a new and novel way, right?
Which is the right thing to do. If you can do that, you absolutely should. Have you heard of the concept of innovation token? It's the idea that as a startup, you say you've got 2 innovation tokens and you should spend them wisely on the things that make you different as a business. And then you should do the most boring thing possible for everything else. You were asking about, or microservices earlier. And like, if you can get your job done with a lamp stack, by God, please do so. The problem is the reason we're embracing all this complexity is not because we want to, it's because increasingly we have to in order to do what we need to do.
Yes. I think we've taken on, that's a whole other area, but I think there are plenty of places where we're taking on way more complexity than we need because that's what we're told. Like, that's how
we find it with our face.
I think that's exactly right. So, well, I think that all of that is fascinating. I think that again, the perspective of what's uniquely interesting or novel that we get. I mean, we spend a lot of time, or I spend a lot of time telling people, of course, you should never build a CI and CD platform. We do, but that's our job. Like, that's the one thing that we do, right? That's the place where we're going to innovate. And so please do less of that and do more of your business. And I'm sure you're in the same space. Like, I will solve this data storage and large scale data processing problem for you, so you have the insights to manage your system, deliver great value to customers. So let's talk about CI and CD a little bit. I mean, I know that's not exactly your main focus, but at the same time, it's very tangential, I think, in that we're all, I believe, in service of trying to get more of that, business value into the hands of customers, however you want to think about it. Trying to help
people do it better.
Right. And I think that, how we deliver and then how we understand our production environments, again, tightly correlated. So what is it that when you're thinking about CI and CD, again, you've said a couple pretty interesting things like, A, this is critical, have it, but B, I think your time cap was 15 minutes. Anything over 15 minutes is a waste of everybody's time or is a risk to your business. So tell me a little bit about just what drives that thinking and what experiences led to that perspective.
Sure. In like 2 minutes or less, right?
Sure.
I could rant about this all day. It came out from the perspective of course, I want my company to succeed. And I started realizing that one of the biggest obstacles to it succeeding is the long delay times. I mean, if you have if it's going to be a month until you see your software, then, it doesn't matter how well you can instrument for real time, responsiveness. It doesn't matter. Right. And there's this virtuous loop, that we were born with as software engineers. We were born with we write some code and we look at it. We write some code and we check it out in production. The writing and the making sure the writing was done well are the same thing. You don't just write a novel and never read it, give it to someone else to read and edit. It's the same thing. That was a bad way to ever break. We're always looking for ways to be efficient and specialize and everything, but that was a bad way to break things up. We should never have built that wall in the first place. If you look at software engineering team, they spend so much of their time waiting on each other. I think of it like the software engineering death spiral, where if it takes hours for your stuff to get out, the right way to do it, in my opinion, is start there. To, whenever an engineer merges their changes to main, it should automatically kick off a CI/CD, pipeline run to produce an artifact, which should get deployed to production in 15 minutes or less, so that you can develop memories as an engineer. You're instrumenting your code as you're writing it, and you're looking for, how is my future self going to understand this? Merge, and then you go look, right? And you ask through the lens of your instrumentation, is it doing what I expected it to do? Does anything else look weird? Which is like, I think of that as observability driven development, a CD, but it encompasses the real world too. The mammoth thing that I think is important here is, number one, how much time people spend doing the stuff that sucks the life out of you. It's not the good stuff of engineering. It's the terrible stuff. It's the frustrating stuff. It's the toil. Like all of that goes up and up the longer your build pipeline is. And number two, just the sheer wastefulness of that. Ever looked at a company and like, oh, cool product. Oh my God, they have 800 engineers. What do they all do? I guarantee you they have very long and torturous CI/CD pipeline.
Yeah.
So I was just thinking about all this, and I was like, there's all this advice out there for people about how to make queues better, how to do your diff better, how to do all this stuff, and they're all just like batting away at the symptoms. When if there's one pressure point that you can start at that makes things flow correctly for everyone else, instead of like fractal badness, it starts right there with that image when you've written the code and when the code is live, and making it that virtuous feedback loop that you own.
Yeah. Well, I'm a fan of this theory, unsurprisingly, since I spend all of my days trying to solve this problem for folks. I think one of the things that I was thinking there as you were describing this, I think I just got a strong lesson in queuing theory as well, right? It's not just the 15 minutes, but how big your org is and how many things are backing up. And when they start to back up, how long does it take to clear that out? Yeah. And so like development flow and how it associates with that is absolutely huge.
You can just see how it flows out, and it just like, it magnifies at every step. Like it gets bigger and harder and more complicated and more confusing and more waiting at every step.
I would imagine there are organizations, I can't think of any of our customers, which is probably a good thing, but I imagine there are organizations that are waiting for the next morning and hoping that the queue is finally cleared before people get back. I mean, a lot of organizations are not all working in the same office anymore because, well, a lot's changed recently, but like hoping that it clears before they start piling more into there. And I can't even imagine what that would do for productivity. So I think you also tend to identify other issues, right? When you say, wow, why can't we get our CI pipeline or CD pipeline down below 15 minutes? Well, this piece of testing is way too hard to get done in 15 minutes. And you stop and say, is that okay? Like, are we comfortable with something that's so complex to test? Or do we need to find another way to build this? How can we parallelize it? Well, this test has to happen before that test, which has to happen before that test. Well, that's a problem. Like, let's stop and think about that, right? And I think it pushes design, right? It in the same way as kind of test-driven development gives you like, oh, if I have to think about how this thing gets tested, let me think about how it's designed in the first place. And I think, to your point, all the way out to observability driven. And I guess I would say the same thing about observability. Like if it's difficult to understand what's happening in your system and you can't instrument it, that should be like a little alarm bell should be going off saying
it's a huge problem. Yeah.
Let's dig in and see if we can make that.
And I feel like, I feel like the fact that this, we've known this for how long? 15 years, and we've had the tools to do this well for at least 5. And I feel like there's like a real failure of leadership here. Like, what is an engineering manager or director or senior engineers like? What is their one job? Their one job is tending to the socio-technical systems of people and tools and production. And you can't solve any one of those on their own, right? It's because it's a feedback loop. Everything you do has an impact on everything else. And And like, we're the ones who are supposed to understand that and make sure that time is carved out to work on these problems, right? That it's not just feature, but that we're loudly advocating for and making a strong case for, no, this is in the business's best interest. No, this is in everyone's best interest, and that's where, this is why I'm trying to calculate, the cost in dollars and like, how wasteful is this of our engineering? The scarcest resource in your universe is probably engineering cycles, and you're wasting it on this garbage.
Right. I mean, how would you sort of build a community of understanding around how to model and think about these things in an effective way that's, that's dollar oriented, business return oriented?
How can you measure an engineer's productivity? I've all agreed that that's literally impossible and you shouldn't try, except, in the most basic of, in the broadest of terms, and not pegging it to any numbers or statistics, making it a combination of, 24/7 feedback, knowledge over time. That's why we need highly technical engineering managers so they can't get snow jobbed, and even then it's going to be imperfect, and we should, proceed with humility and caution. I think it's even more true of organizations made up of those people.
Yeah. I think, well, one thing that you said in there that I think is really interesting is trying to measure an engineer's productivity. And I think much like the systems we're building, it's not usually one, right? It's the system of engineers. Yeah. And what can I learn about the system of engineers?
That is an essential point. I do think that you can measure teams better than you can measure individuals. I think that every manager should have a graph or a dashboard with the accelerate metrics for their team, as well as a fourth one, which is how often are we getting paged outside of hours? And you should know the stats for your team, for your product, and you shouldn't examine them every day and be too reactive about it, but it's good to know if the numbers are increasing or decreasing. It's good to know what your SLO is, and if you're matched or not. It's good to know, you can tell how a team is doing pretty well from those metrics, but it tells you nothing about the individuals, and it's really toxic if you try to translate it.
Yes, 100%. I think well, one thing it might tell you is that you want to check in with some of those individuals because you're like, wow, you've been paged out of hours every day for the last 7 weeks. How are you doing?
Dude,
right?
That's not okay. I believe that there's a compact between, when we blew up the monolith and to microservices, and now everybody have a little more ops in their job title. I do believe that any engineer who works for a highly available 24/7 system should be on call for it, should be available for it. But I also believe that it's management's duty to meet that with, it's not going to suck. And we will dedicate the resources to fixing these systems that it doesn't suck, right? So you don't have to plan your life around it. I think it's reasonable to ask any of these engineers to wake up to fix their services once or twice a year, maybe 3 times, as long as they don't have a small child also waking up in the night. It's not, nobody should have to carry 2 pagers, right? I think that's reasonable, but I don't think it's reasonable to have someone getting woken up every week, let alone every night. And your manager should fucking know that if it's happening.
I actually love there's always concrete numbers in conversation with you. I will admit that I was trying to be overly emphatic on the nightly, but absolutely, what should that look like? What is our contract or understanding as an organization about what's acceptable and what's not, I think is a really important thing for everyone to be evaluating.
And I say that, because I'm trying to get, I'm fine with throwing out bombs. You can't, Honeycomb gets paid way more than that. We're a startup. It's up and down, there's chaos, but we try to couple that with, empathy about, take the next Friday off. If you're on call, take the next Friday off. It's a matter of course. And we do really care. We take it very seriously as a heart attack when somebody gets paged out of hours. Everyone will jump on. We will fix it. We'll take time out of product development. I can't promise it'll be once or twice a year, but I can promise that we'll take it very, very seriously, but dedicate real engineering hours to fixing it. So you do what you can, right?
Yeah. Well, I hear you. It's, I've been primarily a startup person for most of my life. And, I've certainly been that person carrying the pager and doing the customer support and going out and selling and building product. And, but in those cases, I signed up for it, right? That was me building a company. So it changes.
Exactly.
The contract changes as you grow and as you
It can
build
be
out
so
teams.
fun if you chose to do it. If it's your choice. You know that you're rewarded and valued for it. If all these things, it can be a great period of your life to just like throw yourself on this. But it's not for everyone, and you shouldn't force it. So yeah.
Right on. Cool. So as you continue to evolve and continue to build out the product, what, as software and how we build it continues to evolve, what are you excited about? What's coming up that you're really looking forward to?
I'm pretty excited about OpenTelemetry. History littered with the gravestones of prior attempts at this, whether it's open tracing or, all of the other, I didn't have high hopes for it. But I am seeing a lot of adoption. It's everywhere. It's not just in Silicon Valley. We're talking to a lot of teams who are going all in on it. And the thing is, this is really good for users because, I think it's overdue. We should have had more of a telemetry standard a long time ago, but we have it now. Great, cool. It means that if you instrument your systems with OpenTelemetry, you should be able to move from vendor to vendor or try different vendors out without having to re-instrument anything. It should be as simple as like a config line change, which means like so many people are using their vendors because of lock-in or because of the incredible friction and pain of redoing all that work again for marginal benefit, which lets vendors be really lazy. I like this because, it let people try out other tools without having to deal with all the sunk costs. And this will make vendors compete on better experience for users, better tooling instead of just like treating them like a given. So it's good. It's genuinely catching on. It's like fire. And that's really exciting to me.
Right on. I like it. Well, thanks again for joining. It's awesome to get your perspective on so many different things. Congratulations on all the success and continuing to grow at Honeycomb. I think you're doing awesome stuff. We continue to be excited customers and use it for all kinds of things. And thanks to everyone for tuning in and listening to this episode. If you enjoyed this podcast, share it with your friends, subscribe at your local podcast provider of choice. And if there's someone you want us to talk to or something you want us to talk about, hit us up on Twitter at CircleCI. Thanks again, Charity.
Thanks so much for having me.